everyone, this is Mrs. Brodowski, and I'm going to talk to you today about plot, which is the journey that a story or novel takes from the start of the story to the finish. The really cool thing about plot is that it is something that can be changed and manipulated in subtle ways, depending on what an author is trying to do in their story. However, most plots follow a very similar plan and very similar structure. So plot structure follows a pretty typical pattern. You've probably seen this chart before. And we have the exposition at the beginning and an incident that occurs that allows our character to go through a series of tasks or experiences resulting in the climax. And then the incidents and actions fall off until we have the end of our story. So this is really pretty standard, but the great thing is that when we're writing, we can think about, or when we're reading, we can think about how an author is subtly changing different parts of this chart to make the story more interesting. To help you understand this, I'm going to kind of craft a story for you in a little bit of a unique way. And so I'm going to start with some exposition. This is just a fancy word that means background information. You don't know this, but this is actually the cafeteria to my old high school in South Park, Pennsylvania. I'm going to start my story by just saying that when I went to high school, I had a really lively group of friends. I really enjoyed being there for the most part, except when I didn't, which was also frequent. And it was a really great place to be. I graduated in 1999, and a few years later they closed the school and built a new one. And this is a picture that showed up on Facebook about, 6 months or so ago, of what our cafeteria looks like from the building that I went to and graduated from. So there is one thing I wanted to mention about exposition, and while the regular plot graph goes like this, it's not unusual to see a plot graph where the exposition is actually part of the rising action, and you're gradually getting a sense of a character in the rising action. Sometimes the exposition will be the setting, so you'll have the place and the time that the story is taking place in the exposition, also the main characters. So we may have our main and some minor characters that show up early on, but if we really want to get to know a person over the course of a book, chances are we're going to be learning about them throughout the rising action and maybe even up into the climax and falling action. So the story that I'm going to tell you isn't really necessarily about me going to high school. It's really about why I decided that I wanted to teach high school students. So I'm going to put a subplot in here, and it's really going to be about how we had a big-time Jenga battle between one of the senior students and one of the freshman girls this past year at our winter carnival. In my teaching career, there are certain things that help sort of change or solidify or help me think about why I like to teach, and this is one of the perfect situations that showed me that. Now, I got to witness this Jenga battle because I was the teacher who was responsible for recording the scores, and I witnessed the seniors and the freshmen and the spectators become more and more intense as this battle between these two classes raged. And these related events build toward the climax, or what ultimately happens. Now, there were some internal struggles with the Jenga match because, as you can see, Jordan's getting pretty intense, people are watching. Also, he had his iPhone playing special Zen-like music to really set the atmosphere. And then we had Autumn, our freshman competitor, who was just cool as a cucumber. So we have the internal struggles of what's happening with the emotions as the tower gets larger and larger, and the external struggle of actually battling the physical tower itself. Very, very stressful. So climax is a boring word for the French word denouement, and that is the point at which the rising action meets the falling action. It's at this point that the protagonist's problem is basically solved. This is the most interesting action that's going to happen. The internal and external conflicts kind of come together. Usually in a really good book, you're going to have both things. So the character might have been working on something in himself or battling something in him or herself, as well as something in the outside world. But the story doesn't usually end at this point. Usually we have another phase. This picture sums up in one beautiful and somewhat blurry shot exactly what happened with this epic battle. The freshmen were able to defeat the seniors in an upset battle, and we actually get to see the tower falling. So by this point, there were probably 25 or 30 people watching, the temperature in the room had gone up, and this is the moment at the very top of our plot where we can see the internal and external struggles of the protagonist literally crumbling before his eyes. Falling action comes after the climax and before the resolution, and it's really just that. It's the part of the story after the climax and before the very end. I like to call this the cleanup phase because it's a really good chance for the author to kind of figure out and finish up many of the main conflicts and ideas. And it's a time for the reader to kind of put to bed the story. And sometimes the falling action is very, very brief, and sometimes it goes on for several chapters, depending on whether or not this is something that the author or the writer wants to emphasize. So the falling action in our story is literally a cleanup phase where all the pieces of the puzzle in the game have to be put back, the score has to be recorded, the characters, in this case our freshman and our senior, have to process their emotions, whether it be joy or utter devastation, and the other people watching have to go about the rest of their days. So here is an opportunity for us to kind of pick up any pieces that are left over from the story and dust up whatever it is we still feel like we need to say. Now, because this story isn't necessarily just about the epic battle, I'm going to throw a little twist into it. The resolution of this story isn't that Jordan lost the battle and Autumn won and the freshmen beat the seniors. The end of this story for me is why I like to see these kind of things happen. It's why I think it's hysterical and wonderful and fantastic to teach high school students. My students, they might be hard to keep on track because it's March Madness. They might be really tired and just simply not want to do what I want to do during the course of the day. But I always have respect for that, and I really enjoy what it means to be in high school and help people move from this period of time in their adolescence into the rest of their lives in the outside world. And it's a pretty magical time. And for me, that's what I want to end my little story with. It's not that the epic Jenga battle was really the most important thing, but rather being able to be a teacher on the outside and watching it is something that I really, really appreciate. Now, there is one type of resolution that we could leave our audience with that absolutely wouldn't be a resolution, and that would be called a cliffhanger. So I wanted to make sure that I tied up my story, but sometimes, especially if you think about an action movie, an author might decide to do something to the reader that's going to leave them hanging, and that is a choice that they're going to make for a particular effect. I don't recommend it unless you really know what you're doing, because a resolution is very satisfying to the reader, and most people don't want to leave a story feeling unfulfilled. But because you are the writer, you get to decide what's going to happen at the end. And are you going to help the reader finish up the ideas, or are you all done? Thanks for listening to my lecture on plot, and I hope you enjoyed it.